So, as we turn our attention back to reading, I want us to think about these points. 3 questions to consider. Think broadly about reading with your children. In the question, Lee Bortons asks some very intriguing questions and that we need to ask ourselves as we prepare to teach our kids. Why do we want our children to read? What do we want them to read? And how do we want them to read? Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Why do we want our children to read? Why get our information from reading? Why not just get it from a podcast or watch a vlog or read it on a blog or wait for somebody to tell a talking head to tell it to you or to go to class and be instructed? Why get information from reading? Attending to the details will make us better students of everything. So look, from reading, we learn to attend to the details. From reading, we learn critical thinking skills. From reading, we cultivate imagination. We've already seen over our time together that paying attention to the details will make us better students of everything. When we read, we have to pay attention to the details, but we can go back and glean the details that we missed when we're reading. Critical thinking skills are also gained when students learn to give sustained attention to an argument, when they can read a paragraph and see a line of thought, and then read the next paragraph and build on that thought, and read the third paragraph and build again on that thought, and then go back and run the arguments through their brains, doing the pros and cons, the comparing and the contrasting, the analyzing and evaluating. That critical thinking, those critical thinking skills are built. We cultivate imagination. Imagination is invaluable to children. And creating for ourselves in our imagination the world that we're reading about allows us to try out solutions to problems that we may never actually experience in our lives. It allows us to try on new personas. It allows us to live in different time periods, wear different clothes, have different ideas, meet different people. Reading cultivates our imaginations in such a way that we can put ourselves in others' places. It allows us to learn to love our neighbors better. So let's review what we already know about reading. Review the levels of reading: elementary reading, inspectional reading, analytical reading, and syntopical reading. These are the levels of reading that Mortimer Adler has introduced us to. And you remember that yesterday we talked about elementary reading, all right? Remember that elementary level, that elementary stage of reading includes reading readiness, the physical readiness, the language readiness, the intellectual readiness, the personal readiness. We talked about making sure that our children are ready to begin the act of learning to read. We talked about elementary level reading being about learning to read those first simple materials and then building the vocabulary and learning to use context clues to figure out new words and maturing with practice, learning to read different kinds of materials and in different ways. So today we're going to focus on that second level of reading, inspectional reading. I want you to think, what does it mean to inspect something? What do you think? What does it mean to inspect something? Just to look at it closely, to subject it to close inquiry. If you go from the Latin, it actually means to look into. To inspect is to look into. Now, I want you to think about what we were just talking about before the break, the 5 common topics: definition, comparison, circumstance, relationship, and testimony. How might the 5 common topics help you inspect a book? How might those 5 common topics help you look into a book more deeply? Even just in the title or in the chapter headings, you could find words to define. You could compare this book to a similar book, or even a book by the same author, or about the same subject. You could think about the circumstances under which the book was written. Is it a modern day book? Is it about a modern day time? Is it about a time long ago and it was written long ago so that the author has actual knowledge of what he's talking about or describing? What are the circumstances of the book? What relationship does that book have to other books? Is it one of a series? Is it one that is that comes before, that describes a state that comes before, and then you're going to look at a historical period that's going to come after that? What's the relationship that this book has to other things that you know or that you're going to study? Testimony. Are there quotes on the back panel of the book that let you know what somebody that you respect, or maybe somebody that you don't respect, has to say about the book? How can the 5 common topics help you inspect a book? Something to think about. All right. Let's talk about the purpose of inspectional reading. What is the purpose of inspectional reading, do you think? I want you to know that inspectional reading should help you answer 3 questions. What kind of a book or article or work is this? What is this work about as a whole? And what's the structural order of the book? Okay. Why do you think these questions would be important as a reader begins to consider a particular book? Why would these be important questions? Yeah, you might want to know, is this book going to help me answer a question that is relevant to my life? Okay. Is this book by somebody that I consider an authority on this subject? Does this book, is the whole book about something I'm interested in, or is it just a piece? And if it's just a piece, what's the order? What else is contained in this volume? Because maybe I'm only interested in this sliver of the topic, but that's because I don't know these other pieces exist. What's the structural order of the book? Inspecting a book in this way could save you lots of time, because you might be able to evaluate whether or not this particular book or work is going to fit your purpose. If you're looking for up to the minute scientific information, then a book written in the 60s about technology is not going to do it for you. Okay, so some inspectional reading can sometimes eliminate some of your choices as well as add to some of your choices. Inspectional reading has 2 parts, okay? Pre-reading or skimming and superficial reading. Okay, now I see some of you automatically wrinkling your nose about skimming and superficial reading. Those sound like bad ideas to lots of us. Anything superficial sounds like it couldn't be good, and skimming sounds like you're just not willing to put in the effort to do a good job. But let's think about that a little more deeply. What would skimming or pre-reading be? What is skimming? What is pre-reading? Sure. It might include just going lightly over the top of the information. Maybe it's the chapter headings or the first line or even some of the captions under the pictures. Maybe it's in the table of contents, it's the divisions into which the book has been divided. Superficial reading might consist of you reading the first page and opening it up and reading a page in the middle and maybe even reading the last page, or looking in the table of contents and identifying the chapter that you think is most pertinent to what you're interested in and reading a little bit of that chapter. Okay. These could be good ways to begin your reading. It could save you a lot of time. Who needs to do this? Who do you think needs to practice pre-reading, skimming, and superficial reading? Lots of you are raising your hands. I need to practice this. I think everybody should practice this. It would help us to be more choosy with our choices of literature, but it also could save us lots of time just when we're studying a particular subject or a particular consideration of a subject. It also can help your students determine whether this book is going to be within the scope of their capabilities. Is this book going to be way over my head, so much so that I'm not going to get out of it what I'm putting into it? There are too many new vocabulary words. There are too many references I don't understand. It can really help students who are growing in their reading skill not to bite off more than they can chew at the very beginning. Conversely, it could help a student stretch if they find a book that is exactly what they're looking for, but the words are hard. Then they know to go find a reading partner, go find a reading buddy. It lets them know that this resource exists and I need some help in order to fully partake of it. All right, let's think about this in a little bit more detail. How do you skim? How do you skim? Because some of you are saying, okay, I'm ready to think that skimming and superficial reading might not be all bad, but I'm not exactly sure how to do it. So I'm going to take this book that I've been talking about, How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler. It is a well-loved and marked book for me. How would you skim a book? I suggest this. Look at the title page. Look at the title page and the preface. What can you learn from the title page and the preface? Well, sometimes you learn a bigger title. This is How to Read a Book, the Classic Guide to Intelligent Reading. Okay. Sometimes there's a secondary title that the title page will acquaint you with. Sometimes the preface will help you to know if this is a new edition or if this is a reissued edition. Sometimes the preface is written by somebody who's been absolutely touched by this book, and they want to tell you why it's such a good read. Sometimes the preface is by the author who says, yeah, I wrote this book, 50 years ago, and when I went back and looked at it, it needs to be updated. And so you get the author's own insights. So how to skim, look at the title page and the preface. Study the table of contents. Find out whether this book is really going to consider all the different pieces that you already know belong in a consideration of the given subject. So look at the table of contents. Are the chapters long or short? Do they, in this case, they offer me not just the title of the chapter, but all the different headings, all the things that I can find in that chapter. That's awesome, because if I want a quick bit of information, that table of contents helps me hone in on exactly what piece of information I need and where to find it really fast. Check the index. Check the index. All good books like this have an index. So if you know there's a particular topic, or there's a buzzword, or there's a famous person that you want to be sure that this author has considered in their work, you can look in the index. If you know that if you want to see if this author is referencing other books that you're familiar with, look in the index and find out. Read the publisher's blurb on the book jacket or on the back. They are going to make the book sound really good because they want to sell you a copy, but they're also going to be really succinct in telling you what is this book about and how might it be useful to you or to somebody else. So that's a good place to stop. Look at the chapters that seem key. If you know enough about a subject to know what chapters belong in a book on that subject, then check out the key chapters and make sure that that's going to resonate with you and offer you what you're looking for. Sample pages throughout the book. This is super important, guys. You want to be sure that the author's writing style is not going to get on your last nerve, that they're not going to write in such a fashion that you can barely bear to finish a page. You don't want their vocabulary to be so heady that you can't figure out what in the world they mean. And you don't want their bad descriptions or questionable grammar to turn you off of the subject, okay? So check out, perhaps you will discover that, oh, this author has a wonderful way with words, and that will draw you into a deeper consideration of the book, okay? So what do these activities tell us about the book we're considering? Whether or not we want to spend more time with this book, whether it's going to be worth a deeper read. This is a useful skill to teach our students because they're going to be faced with libraries full of books, lots of resources that they can consider. We need to help them do the pre-skimming, the skimming, so that they can see what resource will be the very best for them to give time to. All right. Now I have another question for you. Is pursuing something superficially ever a good thing? I want to say to you that superficial reading can be a good thing. Doesn't she look like she's having a blast? She is reading and she is enjoying her book and her apple. Superficial reading can be a good idea. Sometimes if you dive super deep too fast, in your efforts to master the fine points, you'll miss the big points. Without an initial superficial reading, you can miss the forest for the trees. Here's what I mean. Superficial reading encourages readers to read through an entire work without pausing to look up the unfamiliar words or the references or the ideas, okay? So you're going to start and you're going to do a superficial read. You're going to read, and if you get to a word you don't know, you're going to try to figure it out from the context and you're going to go on. If they reference a book that or a story or a character from ancient mythology and you think, I don't know who that is, you're just going to press on and see if you can figure it out from the context. We're encouraging this so that the reader has a chance to get the big picture, which might really be missed if you read in fits and starts. If you spend so much time looking up words and looking up references, you might actually lose the big picture of what the author is trying to get across to you. Of course, that is predicated on the whole idea that you're going to go back and do a deeper dive beneath the surface reading eventually, okay? Now, what can help us do that digging deeper when we do read, or what can help us identify those places where we need to go back and dig in for true comprehension? Well, taking notes, of course. I want to talk to you for just a few minutes about making a book your own. It's all about marking in your book. All right. Now, look, there are lots of ways to mark your book. Many of you who've been through the challenge program have worked on the highlighting system. It uses lots of different colors for history and for characters and for numbering lists, lots of different colors. And that is a great thing. You can mark with highlighters. You can mark with symbols. The point is to make a book your own, to fully engage with it, you need to be able to write in it. Now, I know that for some of you, writing in a book just seems like a terrible desecration. Here's what I want you to be open to: the idea of marking your book so that you can have a conversation with your book. When you mark a book and it becomes your own, it's as though you were having a conversation with the author. And if you use a book that someone's read and marked before you, it's as though you're having a conversation with the previous reader, okay? A relationship. Marking a book is like having a conversation. It's a way to have a relationship with the book. Okay, so here are some of my suggestions. And I'm going to show you but I actually do practice what I preach, okay? Lots of different ways to mark your book. You can underline, okay? So you can underline when you get to a sentence that just absolutely sings to you, or that makes you recognize this. This is why I picked up this book. This is what I have to remember. Underline that sentence. Now, sometimes, y'all, there will be whole passages that you recognize you need to underline. This whole section goes together. I need to remember all of this, and all of these sentences together really comprise one thought. So shouldn't you just underline all of it? Well, here's the thing. If you underline everything, it's the same thing as underlining nothing. And so instead of underlining every line, just make a vertical line in the margin. That alerts you to the fact that all of these sentences together make one point. And for me to really get the import of what insight grabbed me my first time through, I need to consider all of those things. You could put a star in the margin. That's what I do when I get to something that I know is pivotal, something that I want to be sure to refer to again, some quote that I want to pass on to somebody. I need a way to find it fast, a way that will stand out from mere underlines. So I'll put a star in the margin of the things that really resonate with me. Sometimes you can use numbers in the margin. If there's a list, if the author offers you points in succession that really show you the progression of his argument, you might want to put numbers in the margin so that you remember this was a good point, but it wasn't the only point. And so you keep the numbers going, and so that you know when the argument began and when it ends. Sometimes I put the numbers of other pages in the margin because sometimes I will get to a piece farther into the book and think, oh, that relates to this thing that I underlined in the first chapter. And so I will go back to that first chapter where I made a star or underline, and I'll write the later page number here so that when I go back and find this pivotal point, I will remember that, okay, 3 chapters ahead, he's going to go into more detail. And that's how I'll find this thread of thought again. So numbers of other pages in the margin. Sometimes you can circle keywords or phrases. Here, I read this book several years ago before we even knew that this practicum was going to be about reading. But what I circled was the art of reading. I thought, that's beautiful. There is an art to reading. And I began to think about what we should be doing a better job of. Teaching our children to read and making them better readers. And how could we appreciate that reading is not just a skill, but an art? And so I had circled that word because that was a key word or a key phrase for me. And then sometimes I write comments in the top or bottom margins of my book. Here you can see I wrote 2020 in the side margin over here because it resonated with me so deeply that I thought, oh, that's it. Once I knew that we were going to do cultivating the conversation, the art of exposition, I went back and reread this and thought, okay, 2020, this is it. This needs to be in the practicum. Sometimes I make smiley faces when I really like what the author has to say. Sometimes I make pithy comments like, this is the worst sentence I've ever read. And it's the only way of telling the author that I think that was a terrible sentence is to write it in my book. And so I do. Sometimes I write comments to myself to remind me to refer to another book that this has reminded me of. Okay. So mark your book. I want you to see that it is something that I've started doing that does help me. I wonder if it might help you as you consider subjects and as you consider books that you intend to study with your student. I think it could help our students use our resources more fully. But let's see what this might look like together. All right. I want you to look in your practicum handout. I want you to find the excerpt from the Declaration of Independence. Okay, let's look at a familiar but not necessarily easy piece of writing the Declaration of Independence. All right. So it's just a short excerpt. We're not reading the whole declaration. Okay. So in your handout, I want you to find that piece and let's read this together. It's really short. So I'm going to read and you just follow along. And as you follow along, you might want to practice marking your text. You could circle keywords. You could number sequential arguments. Perhaps you will underline things that you think really stand out. You could make a note to yourself in the margin. But after we read together, I'm going to give you a few minutes to go back and look at it and mark your text. All right. Think about now, though, what should we mark? What is it that we want to come back to? What do we believe, at least initially, are the key ideas or words or phrases? All right. You follow along. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's gods entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. All right. I'm going to give you just a second to go back and mark the text. Use some of your tools, your marking tools, to mark up the Declaration of Independence, and then we'll talk. All right, so somebody tell me, what did you underline or what did you star or number? All right, did you circle them or underline them or number them? Numbered them. Okay, so there's a list. All right, it's easy to keep track that these things are alike, that they belong together. Somebody else. Somebody has circled necessary. Okay, so maybe that's a word you feel like needs to be defined. In what way is the Declaration of Independence necessary? It seems necessary to us now, okay, because it began our government, our country's search for freedom. It formalized that, but why was it necessary? So that might lead you to all kinds of conversations. What else did somebody circle or underline? Oh, self-evident. That's a great word to define. To attend to. That's a great word to have a conversation about. What does it mean for a truth to be self-evident? And what truths does the Declaration claim are self-evident? Look, there's a couple. Look, that all men are created equal and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That's cool. Those are the self-evident truths. Awesome. Look at that very first paragraph. This is a fun exercise. Can anybody find the subject of that sentence? This makes a great conversation. The subject of that first sentence, which the whole paragraph, look, the whole paragraph is one sentence. So do you know what the subject is? No, it's so funny. Keep looking. A decent respect. Respect is the subject of that sentence. Respect requires what? That they should declare the causes which impel them. Okay, so simply looking deeply at that, wrestling through that, will tell you that the whole subject of that first paragraph is the respect that these writers recognize, and it is that respect that requires them to do this. This is not, it's them saying this is not our big idea. This respect that we have requires that we give you the reasons why we're getting ready to break away from your country. Okay. All right. Somebody else, what would you number or circle? Okay, somebody circled rights. All right. Jennifer already mentioned the unalienable rights, and she listed them: life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But why are these rights? Can you define a right? Could you compare a right to a privilege? Okay. Under what circumstances do citizens deserve these rights? All right. So do you see how the 5 common topics can help you cultivate a conversation about something that you're reading, especially if you've done skimming, superficial reading, and marking up the text? Tell me. Yes, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish or what? To institute a new government. See, that's awesome. You found another right. And look, right and right. So what you could do is circle both of those words and connect them with a line that would remind you that what you need to do is consider both. If you're considering one, you need to consider both. And how are those first rights mentioned? How do they lead to the last right mentioned? And what does that mean? What did it mean for history? What does it mean for us today? All kinds of great conversations can come out of questions that you ask, that you frame using the 5 common topics. All right. Now that you have seen what this looks like, I want you to practice with another excerpt. It's at the bottom of the same page of your handout. It's an excerpt from a famous speech, "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death," given by Patrick Henry. So with a partner or with your small group, take a few minutes and use those 5 common topics to frame some questions that can lead to a great conversation after you spend some time marking your text.